In 1741, a Dutch merchant ship logged something in its captain's diary that the East India Company tried to bury for 200 years. The entry reads simply, "Land found where no land should be. Sent 6 men ashore. None returned. We did not wait for a 7th boat." That land had no name on any chart. Sailors who lived to whisper about it later gave it one anyway. They called it Ulthos. Beat, let it hang. Since that first sighting, at least 11 separate expeditions, military, scientific, and private, have set foot on this landmass. The number of people who have come back to describe what they saw is exactly 0. Not most of them. Not the majority. 0. Today, we're going to walk through every documented attempt to reach Ulthos, every leaked transcript, every declassified radio call, and by the end, you're going to understand why some governments would rather let this story die as an internet myth than admit how much they actually know. Stick around, because the last 10 minutes of this video contain audio that was never meant to leave a research vessel. Let's start with the basics, because the internet has mangled this story into 100 different versions. Ulthos is described, across nearly every source, the same way: a landmass roughly the size of Ireland, sitting in a stretch of ocean that official maps simply leave blank. Not uncharted, in the sense of low-resolution satellite data, blank, as in intentionally omitted. It doesn't appear on any current maritime chart. It doesn't appear in satellite feeds that are publicly accessible. And that's the first strange detail worth sitting with. In an age where every square meter of Earth is supposedly photographed by orbit, this place is a hole in the record. Some researchers argue Ulthos doesn't move, exactly. It's more that the coordinates reported by different expeditions never quite line up. One captain's log puts it in open ocean roughly 1,000 miles from the nearest shipping lane. Another, decades later, describes reaching it after barely 2 days from a completely different starting point. Skeptics say this just proves the whole thing is a compiled legend, different sailors describing different islands and later writers stitching them into one myth. But here's what keeps this story alive instead of dying as a 18th century tall tale. The descriptions of the land itself, across 2.5 centuries and multiple languages, are eerily consistent. Black sand beaches. A treeline that starts abruptly, as if planted rather than grown. Fog that doesn't burn off with the sun. And almost every account, separated by hundreds of years and thousands of miles of ocean between where they were recorded, mentions the same sound coming from somewhere inland. A low, rhythmic knocking. Like something striking wood, evenly spaced, never stopping. We'll come back to that sound. Multiple times. Because it's the one detail that shows up in a Dutch captain's diary, a 1962 Navy transcript, and a 2019 leaked field recording, 3 sources that could not plausibly have copied from one another. Let's go back to that 1741 voyage, because it's our earliest solid documentation. The ship was the Ondergang, a Dutch East India Company vessel making a return run that, by all normal navigation, should never have passed anywhere near the coordinates it logged. The captain's diary, which surfaced in a Rotterdam maritime archive in the 1930s and has since been digitized, describes spotting land at dawn, land that didn't match any chart aboard. 6 crewmen rowed ashore. The diary describes watching them walk the beach, wave back to the ship, and then walk toward the treeline, at which point, in the captain's words, the fog took them as a curtain takes a stage. They watched for 3 hours. No one emerged. When a rescue boat was prepared, the crew reportedly refused to man it. The ship left at nightfall. Now, is this just a period ghost story, the 18th century equivalent of a campfire tale? Maybe. Sailors of that era told plenty of them. But this diary entry is the seed that every later account seems to independently confirm, and confirmation from unrelated sources 200 years apart is exactly the kind of pattern that should make you pause rather than dismiss. The next well-documented sighting doesn't come for over a century. 1887, a British survey vessel called the HMS Larkspur, conducting hydrographic mapping work far from any known shipping lane. Their log, held in British naval archives, describes an island that should not exist by any prior chart. And this is the detail that matters, describes the same abrupt black sand treeline, and the same knocking sound carried on wind from inland. The Larkspur did not send a landing party. Whatever the crew had heard about the region already. Whether rumor of the undergang had somehow reached them, which historians consider unlikely given the time and distance, or whether they were independently spooked, the captain's log simply says, "We did not test it." Fast forward to the 20th century, when "we didn't test it" stopped being an acceptable answer for the militaries and research bodies that started taking these reports seriously. 1962, the Meridian Survey. Declassified partially, large sections remain redacted. Documents describe a joint research operation, ostensibly a Cold War-era oceanographic mapping project, that detoured to investigate an anomalous landmass detected by sonar in a region where charts showed only open sea. A 12-man team went ashore. Radio contact was maintained for approximately 90 minutes. The transcripts, released decades later after Freedom of Information requests, describe increasingly disjointed reports. Initial excitement at the flora. Nothing matches known temperate or tropical species. Then descriptions of the knocking sound growing louder, and finally, in the last recorded transmission, a single team member repeating a phrase that redaction has obscured in every released copy except one leaked version, which reads, "It's not knocking. It's counting." Contact was lost. The support vessel reported enormous difficulty relocating the coastline the following day, as though the fog had swallowed not just the men, but the shoreline itself. No further landing was attempted. The operation was classified for over 40 years. 1979, the Solveig Incident. A Norwegian research vessel studying deep ocean currents reported instrument anomalies consistent with nearby landmass, despite being roughly 900 nautical miles from any charted island. 2 crew members took a small craft to investigate visually. Neither returned. The vessel's own account, given to Norwegian maritime authorities upon return to port, states they searched the area for 11 hours and found no trace of land, boat, or crew. As if the coastline itself had been an illusion the instruments briefly agreed to believe in. This is one of the details that separates Ulthos from a typical missing persons at sea story: multiple, independently operated vessels, using different technology across different decades, all describe the same experience of losing the land itself after losing the people sent to it. At this point you're probably sorting all of this into one of a few buckets, so let's go through the leading explanations seriously, one at a time. Theory 1. It's a hoax, or a compiled legend. This is the most reasonable skeptical position, and it deserves real weight. Maritime history is full of phantom islands, land masses reported by sailors, added to charts, and later removed once modern surveying proved they never existed. Navigational error, mirages caused by temperature inversion, a real phenomenon called fata morgana, and simple embellishment account for dozens of vanished islands throughout naval history. The counterargument researchers raise is the specificity and consistency of details across sources that had no clear way to influence one another, particularly the sound. Fata Morgana explains seeing land that isn't there. It doesn't explain a Dutch captain in 1741 and a U.S. Navy transcript in 1962 independently describing an identical rhythmic knocking. Theory 2, a genuinely uncharted landmass, kept off official maps deliberately. Some researchers argue Ulthos is real, physically, but its coordinates are suppressed. Either because whatever happens there is considered too dangerous to publicize, or because a government or private entity is using its remoteness for something else entirely. Weapons testing has been floated, though there's no solid evidence for this beyond speculation. Theory 3, the sensory trap hypothesis. This is the theory favored by several of the more serious independent researchers who've spent years compiling these accounts. It proposes that Ulthos isn't hidden by politics or secrecy, but by something about the location itself, an atmospheric or geomagnetic anomaly that disorients ships' instruments and crews' perception simultaneously, meaning the island is always exactly as far away and exactly as reachable as it needs to be to draw people in. It's a theory that sounds more like folklore than science, admittedly, but it's the one that best accounts for the pattern researchers keep flagging. Not that ships fail to find Ulthos, but that they find it too easily, relative to their actual position, and never find it again the same way twice. Theory 4, and this is the one with the most circumstantial support. It's real, it's not going anywhere, and the knocking is not a natural phenomenon. The most detailed account we have doesn't come from a military or government source. It comes from a privately funded expedition in 2003, organized by a group of independent researchers and adventurers who had spent years compiling exactly the kind of maritime records we've just covered. Unlike prior attempts, this team came prepared with modern satellite communication, redundant GPS systems, and, critically, body cameras on every team member who went ashore. Their support ship maintained contact for the first 2 hours. The footage that survived, recovered from a single waterlogged camera found drifting weeks later, roughly 40 miles from the last known coordinates, has never been officially released in full, but portions were leaked online in 2019 and have circulated since, with authenticity that outside forensic reviewers have called difficult to fake convincingly, though not conclusively verified. What the footage shows, according to those who've reviewed it, and the partial transcript that accompanies it. The team walks a black sand beach. The treeline, as described in every account before it, begins abruptly. Healthy, mature trees standing in a near-perfect line. Like they were placed, one team member says on camera. Around the 11-minute mark of the recovered footage, the knocking begins. It's described as rhythmic, evenly spaced, coming from deeper in the treeline. The team, against what any of us watching from home would probably scream at our screens for them to do, moves toward it. The last 2 minutes of usable footage are largely footsteps, heavy breathing, and fragments of dialogue. Then, and this is the part that has kept this leak circulating for years, one team member's camera briefly captures what reviewers describe as a shape between the trees. Too brief, too low resolution, and too heavily compressed by reuploads to say anything definitive about it. People who want to see a figure, see a figure. People who want to see a shadow and a trick of fog see that instead. The recording ends abruptly. None of the 7 team members were ever found. The support vessel's final log entry, before it too lost contact with monitoring stations for 9 hours, reads only, "They're not answering. The shore is gone." This brings us to the piece of this story that made it impossible for me not to cover, because unlike the leaked video, this next piece of audio has a chain of custody that's at least partially verifiable. In 2019, alongside the footage fragments, a 47-second audio clip surfaced, allegedly recovered from the same waterlogged equipment. It has been analyzed by several independent audio forensic hobbyists. Not, to be clear, any officially credentialed lab, so treat this with real skepticism. And the consensus among those reviewers is that the audio doesn't show obvious signs of digital splicing or synthetic generation, at least using publicly available detection tools. Play audio clip, 47 seconds. Describe over/after, do not claim certainty. What you just heard, if the recovery story is accurate, is wind, footsteps, labored breathing, and underneath it, a knocking that does not waver in tempo for the entire 47 seconds. No natural woodpecker, no loose ship rigging, no known environmental sound behaves with that kind of mechanical consistency over that duration. Around the 40-second mark, several listeners have picked out what sounds like a voice, layered faintly beneath the knocking. Audio enhancement attempts by online researchers have produced wildly different interpretations of what that voice says. Which, frankly, is exactly what you'd expect from noise reduction software pulling patterns out of chaos, whether or not there's really a voice there at all. I'm not going to tell you what I think it says, because I don't want to plant that suggestion in your ears before you've listened yourself. Go back, listen again, and tell me in the comments what you hear. So here's the natural question: if this story is real, even partially, why hasn't anyone mounted a serious, well-funded, modern expedition since 2003? The honest answer is that a few groups have tried to organize follow-up expeditions, and every single one has stalled, for reasons that are mundane on their own, but stack up strangely as a group. Funding falls through. Permits get denied by nations claiming the relevant waters fall outside their jurisdiction, or inside someone else's. Key organizers lose interest, or in at least 2 documented cases, simply stop responding to their own expeditions' mailing lists entirely, with no public explanation. Skeptics will tell you this is exactly what you'd expect from any ambitious, underfunded amateur expedition attempting something this logistically difficult. Most disappear into bureaucracy and lost momentum, monster or no monster. But researchers who've spent years on this case point to something else: the coordinates. Every serious researcher who has tried to cross-reference the reported positions from the Ondergang, the Larkspur, the 1962 Meridian Survey, and the 2003 expedition comes back with the same frustrating result. They don't converge on one location. They form a rough, imperfect boundary, a wide stretch of ocean where each account puts the land, but never in quite the same square mile. Which brings us back to Theory 3, the idea that this isn't a fixed place you can put a pin in, but something that finds ships, not the other way around. I want to be straight with you about where this leaves us, because I think that's more respectful of your time than pretending we've solved something today. There is no confirmed satellite image of Ulthos. There is no verified survivor. Everything we've covered tonight sits somewhere between genuinely strange historical pattern and a very well-maintained modern legend. And I think the honest answer is that it's probably some combination of both: real disappearances at sea, retroactively woven into a single continuous story by people, including researchers like the ones behind that 2003 expedition, who wanted so badly for the pattern to mean something that they may have shaped the evidence to fit it. But I'll leave you with this. Every single documented account, spanning 280 years, for languages, and technology ranging from a handwritten ship's diary to a 4K body camera, every one of them describes the same sound. A knock. Evenly spaced. Coming from somewhere inland. Never stopping. Whatever that is, it's been consistent for a very long time. If you want to dig through the primary sources yourself. The Ondergang diary excerpts, the declassified Meridian Survey documents, and the 2019 leaked footage, I've put links to everything in the description, including the raw uncut 47-second audio clip so you can listen for yourself and tell me what you hear in the comments. Subscribe if you want to be here for whenever the next piece of this surfaces, because based on the pattern of the last 280 years, it's not a matter of if, but when. Thanks for watching. And if you ever find yourself on a chart looking at a suspiciously blank patch of ocean, maybe don't go looking for what's filling in the gap.